For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host, Jade Black. Today I'm doing another episode about one of the big themes in the Determined Ones. I'm talking found family today. I'll say this is something I wasn't expecting to be as big a deal as it is originally. It's something that has just happened, and I think that is the best way for it to happen, is for it to just blossom on its own. But I want to talk about why this is such a big theme in Determined Ones, and I've had to do a pretty big think about why this has come up the way it has. And one of the big ones is because, well, one of the other themes of Determined Ones is dysfunctional family. A lot of my characters have very difficult backstories. That's something I covered in the mental health episode. But a lot of them are family rejects, or, their family has died or rejected them. Or they've just not had a good relationship for this reason or that reason or the other. And so, as often happens, they find their own family, whether intentionally searching that out or not. It just kind of happens. And politics is another reason that people do find their family. They find, people who have similar ideologies to them and are brave enough to talk about it, and people bond through that, particularly when oppression is another such a big thing. And you find someone who's against that, and, something quite special can happen there, and it often does. And again, this ties in with injustice as well, and quiet outrage, and when that quiet outrage finds a kindred soul and those sorts of things happen, and it's honestly one of the beautiful things that does happen in life, and I think it's particularly poignant in the darker genres of literature, and I almost think it's particularly important as well that to have that moment of, there's this big crisis that affects a lot of people, and even if it's small numbers, people do band together to tackle it together, and some beautiful things happen because of that. I want to talk about, when I say found family, that there are a lot of different types of found family as well. And sometimes it mirrors family, like blood family relationships and dynamics, quite closely, and sometimes it doesn't. And I wanted to talk about the different examples of that. So Shinichi is one that's a very obvious sort of father-son kind of relationship with the Colonel, and it's never mentioned explicitly on page that it's like that for them, but it's very clearly there that the Colonel is an amount of a father figure to Shinichi, and Shinichi is somewhat of a son figure to him, and the age gap between them is probably a bit bigger than you might expect for a blood family relationship of that kind, but I think that's sort of the beauty of found family, that doesn't really matter in the same way, and it is just very natural and what naturally forms there. And that's the same with I as well. I've mentioned his friendship with Danos a few times on the podcast by now, and I think I have probably mentioned, at least at one point, that I did have siblings of his own growing up, but, family reject and all that. And when he meets Daneth and their relationship starts to bloom, there is this underlying feeling for I of Daneth is the brother that he wishes he'd had growing up, and it's a very brotherly relationship for him. But that's not the only connection I has. I also has Atsushi, and Atsushi is Haru's dad, who I've mentioned a few times by now. But I and Atsushi again have quite a parental relationship there, and they're both very aware that that's what that is. I has a very weird relationship with his father. His father just wasn't really around much when he was a kid, and there's not hostility there because of it, particularly. I mean, there's tension that arises naturally because of that, and there's resentment on both sides at times. Atsushi does he sees that Ai has a tough parental relationship. He's very good at spotting things like that, and he's like, okay, well, come here, I will make things better for you. And Ai is very happy for that to happen, and he trusts Atsushi very deeply to, be a good person for him, and it's very wholesome and it's very sweet, and it's something I have written canonically, but doesn't explicitly appear on page in the determined ones, at least not yet. We might get a glimpse of that, not as seen on stage, I don't know. We'll see. When I was thinking about this, what sort of found family do people have, I started thinking about Helga, because I've always felt that it is there for her with Arman. Arman is an amount of found family to her. The two of them are very close in their own way, but do have their secrets, and at times it can be quite tense between them, but there is a lot of connection, there is a lot of love there in a weird way. I mean, I don't have an explicit answer for how I'd define their blood family relationship. It's slightly vague. It's not quite a sibling relationship, it's almost more a cousin relationship, potentially. But there is definitely a quite clear dynamic that's in that vein there. And again, what I like about this is that Arman is significantly older than Helga. He's 25 odd years older than her, but it is a very clear sibling cousin type relationship. It's not a parental thing at all, and I do find that in its own way quite beautiful. Hanzo's an interesting one on this one, because he does have an extensive found family, and they're all very aware that that's what it is, and they've chosen for it to be that way, though none of them I don't think would explicitly say it because they don't have to. But the relationships are a lot less defined there, where it's okay, you're my family, but, I wouldn't call you a brother, I wouldn't call you a dad, you're just part of my family, and it doesn't really matter what sort of position any of us are in, particularly because we're just some kind of weird, slightly messy, maybe a bit dysfunctional found family, but we're very clearly a family and a strong family unit, and it just kind of doesn't matter to them all that much. And you do get into some mental gymnastics with some of the things they do, but maybe that's for another time. Isamu's another interesting one on this one, because he does have a found family, but he's not all that aware of it. He's aware of it at times. It's semi-subconscious for him, where there are some people he would proverbially take a proverbial bullet for sure. There are a few of those. But he doesn't always see that that's a reciprocal feeling. And I don't think he has the language to really understand what to call those feelings or how to articulate that really at all, other than to say you're a really close friend, the sort of friend that, you don't really come across. He doesn't have the language there, and I don't think he really understands what it is, even though I do wonder if that changes after the main timeline and he starts learning more about that, but that's not something I can confirm or deny at this stage. Let's talk about how this found family works, because this is pretty consistent across a lot of them, that it is very subconscious and nothing's ever said. So like, okay, but you're a brother to me, or there's none of that, really. It just kind of happens very instinctively, very naturally. Nothing's ever said because it never has to be. There is just an innate understanding that no matter what happens, we're ride or die, you've got my back and I've got yours, and if you don't want me to ask questions, then I won't, and a lot of the time you won't have to tell me that you don't want me to ask questions. There might be the odd time where I'm like, do you want to talk about this? But generally speaking, we get each other, and we love each other the more for it. And there's a pretty big impact on all the characters involved with found family, and that's not just on them as characters, but it's also on them for the plot. Found family can have a huge impact on the plot and throw a lot of spanners, especially with Hanzo. But I want to talk about the impact on the characters that this has, because again, this is pretty consistent, that even if they don't necessarily realize that they have a found family, or quite how tight-knit it is. Because Hanzo, I think, is the best at recognizing how tight-knit and how deep the found family love is, although there's a whole load of layers to his found family. The others aren't so great at realizing that. There's, I think, a lot is left unsaid because it doesn't need to be said, but some of the things that are left unsaid would be better verbalized for true understanding of the true nature of the love there. But I think there's also something beautiful in leaving it unsaid and people coming to those conclusions when it matters the most, and realizing how loved they truly are by people who really who consciously made that choice to love them of their own accord, with no, BS societal obligations to that. And I think there is something very beautiful about that in the darkest moments. And I think, again, particularly in dark literature, where a lot of really awful stuff happens, often in very quick succession, and takes tolls, a lot of big tolls on a lot of people, moments like that, where something truly beautiful does happen, I love that. I really do. In those moments, these characters, these people, they realise that there is a safety net. A lot of them are aware that actually, if they fall, there is someone to catch them when they really need it. And, Shinichi's one who learns that very clearly over the course of Shadow on the Snow, that in the early stages, he's very stoic, I will deal with this on my own, I will cry in the wardrobe and come out only when I'm ready, and that might be 24 hours later, but surely no one will notice. But over the course of it, he comes to realise that it doesn't have to be like that for him, and he becomes more open to that. That's the most poignant example of that, I think. And there's also a lot of protecting each other. A lot of these people have very strong protector instincts, and particularly with the more parental relationships with people like Ai and Atsushi, there is an amount of, I want to protect my sort of found child from this, but also, that works the other way as well. And actually, my found dad doesn't need to know this thing. I want to protect him because he's suffered enough, and there's a lot of that. And the impact that all of this has on the plot, I think, is particularly interesting. Because I mentioned with Shinichi already that Shinichi and, you know, his big best friend in Shadow on the Snow is Albatross, and the depth of that bond goes so damn far towards the late stages of Shadow on the Snow, the things that they do for each other without ever saying a word, and again the intrinsic understanding of that, though they'd never, neither of them would, honestly, they'd never say what that was or necessarily what each other meant to them, not out of pride, but again because they don't have the language to truly articulate that. And what it means for the plot, that they're all, almost always together there, but those two are practically joined at the hip, honestly, and if they weren't, there'd be certain situations that they couldn't really get out of in the same way. And the times where they're not together, a lot of the time things do go wrong, because, much as anything, two heads are better than one. And if you're in a war, then if you get ambushed, you could really do with an extra pair of hands or two there. I think Hanzo's found family probably plays the single biggest role in plot in Snakebite. The number of wrenches that lot threw at me was just plain rude at points, honestly, because it was, oh no, we're investigating this now and we just know that this thing's happening, so we're just going to tell Hanzo when it's relevant, and like, excuse me, this was not supposed to come up, what do you mean? That Hanzo just knows this thing, or you're doing that thing, or you're doing what in the era, exactly? There's so much that's come up, and so much that's come from them, and the effect that has on Hanzo, and who ends up sort of joining his found family, that I just sort of didn't foresee. I mean, particularly with Jiro, I didn't expect him to really be any more than Hanzo's sort of semi-blank-faced assistant, but the person that Jiro becomes, and how much of a bond he has with Hanzo, and how much he impacts things. Koni, again, doesn't see that he has a found family at all. That is one that is quite one-sided from the other person, but his found family, well, the other people, his found family protect him from a lot, and he is just blissfully unaware. You know, they do their jobs correctly on that one. You could certainly argue, and with the situation he's in and the sort of person he is and the effects that those things would have on him, yes, absolutely. And in time he actually does realise what's happened and does see it as, you know, I really owe you people a favour, and whatever you need, I'll be there. I think that's very beautiful for someone like Koni, who's so inherently distrusting that that whole arc happens. I do love that. Ai's found family is an interesting one, because there are times when they do protect him, and protect him a lot. But there are also times where they really get in the way and don't say things where they should, because a lot of Ai's found family, a lot of that for Ai happens very quickly. Ai tends to bond with people surprisingly quickly, honestly. It's not something I would necessarily expect from him, but he does have, you know, extensive military background and the whole sort of soldiers' camaraderie thing. And he does often form very quick bonds with people, and that goes very deep very quickly for him, despite everything that he's been through. And, you know, he might know what to do in those scenarios really quite well, partly because, you know, he raised a daughter with a pretty bad temper, and he had to learn a lot of emotional intelligence very quickly, but also the war and dealing with Shinichi and his difficulties, because Ai and Shinichi did cross paths in the war a fair bit. And getting through that sort of war as well, you have to have an amount of emotional intelligence with yourself, so I's very good at stuff like that, but his found family don't always know what the right thing to say is, because they haven't known him for very long, some of them. So they might see him in a situation that he's genuinely happy in, but he shouldn't be, because it's dangerous one way or another, and they just don't know whether they should say something, or whether he's sort of putting on that he's happy, but he's aware of things, and that does lead to some conflicts. But I, being the big-hearted, lovely man he is, he understands it all. He does, and I has a lot of love to give. He's not always very good at showing it, but he does. I think what I really do love about Found Family is the realism with it. And I know a lot of people would think, well, I've never met, a brother or all this, but like, what do you think their marriage is at the end of the day, other than saying that this person I came across is, we're not in no way related or anything like that, or at least I hope not, but they are someone I want to spend the rest of my life with. They are family to me, and I love them more deeply than anything else than I could ever say, I could ever really truly express. And what is marriage if not a found family in its own way? And once you experience a sort of found family bond, be that in a sort of romantic marriage sort of way, or in any other kind of way, it does open your eyes to things, I think. There's actually a lot of it about that goes unsaid, because a lot of the time people don't have the language, or they don't know that they need to say anything. There is a lot of it there, and that feeds into big community spirit as well, because these found families will cross paths with each other, and they won't become one massive family or anything, but people look out for each other with those sorts of relationships when people realise that that's there. And in dark times, what that turns into, with these, we'll ride or die, we'll do anything and everything you need, we'll be there, we'll do what we can. But just because there's no obligation in any sense, no matter how BS it is, that, you're related by blood, so you have to love each other and all that bullshit. They know there's none of that baggage there. We know we just happened across each other, but, we have made the conscious choice to love you so much that none of that matters, that we will do anything and everything we can for you. And I do think that there is something profoundly beautiful in that there isn't, I don't think there is necessarily a verbal way of explaining the beauty of that in its entirety, fully, truly. I don't think there is. But it does exist, and it's a very beautiful thing, and it's something that I do love to write about. And it's not something that I ever set out to do with any of my writing. I've never set out to do it, I never will ever set out to do it, because that's not what it is. If you try and force it, well, I think it's probably one of the worst things to force. It's forced romance, but worse, because it's such an inherently human, naturalistic chemistry thing that happens, that trying to force that is just, it's the antithesis of what found family really truly is. That it consistently happens in the sort of world that I write about, where there's a lot of hardship and a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of death and war and oppression and injustice, that something like this happens so consistently. It's a light in that darkness that, again, I can't properly express verbally what that does. Maybe I should just make an art piece around what that is. That would be something that I think would be good to do, would be to do a big drawing around that whole idea of found family and dark literature and how beautiful that can be in the darkest moments. How beautiful that is. And if you like my art and you're looking for exclusive art, Pinterest is the place for that. There's actually at this point there's quite a lot of exclusive art on there that does explore deeper meanings and deeper themes in visual ways. So there's this whole arguably found family piece that is, again, it's very simple. It's white pen on black. That's about people finding each other in every life. And that is exclusive to Pinterest. It's the only place you can see it. I'm Jade_Black21 on Pinterest. There's an art board. That's the place you want to look for that. And keep an eye out for this, what found family is in dark literature and how profoundly beautiful that is as an art piece, because that's where they'll go. And if you're looking for found family in my writing and seeing those relationships in snippets and semi-live updates and potentially joining the monthly Thrills community on Twitter, I'm JadeBlack21 on there. And if you're looking for the home of the podcast, where you get advance notice of what the episode for the week is, soundbite teaser reels, and some other stuff about the indie book community and how talented you guys all are, check out Instagram. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. And talking of talented indie writers, if you are one of them, if you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. Indie and self-pub are the people I want to hear from. There's a list of things I want to know in the description. Include that in your initial contact. My email's on the screen if you're interested in contacting me. There's no age category restriction, no genre restriction. Doesn't have to be a novel. Novellas are welcome, poetry is welcome, whatever you got, bring it in. Let's see what we can do. And until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright JBlack 2024.